he was kind of viewed by Iranians as like an apolitical figure because he was not involved in the domestic repression at home. So you can blame, the Ayatollah. There's plenty of blame to go around, but generally speaking, even though he was in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard in Iran, he wasn't viewed as like part and parcel or partaking in the domestic repression at home.
In 1999, a reformist newspaper called Salam was forced to close by the Iranian government. They had been critical of the government, and they had published information that was seen as embarrassing to the Ayatollah. After a report detailing the state's plot to curtail moderate press reforms, the intelligence ministry used the nation's courts to ban Salam's activities. This led to a week of student protests. In these protests, students that were involved in the demonstrations had had their dormitories raided, and in one of these raids, one of the students was killed. This spurred more riots and more protests. Qasem Soleimani, along with other hardline IRGC commanders, had penned a letter to Iran's reformist president, Mohammed, which stated that if the protests were not suppressed, that the military would depose Khatami in a coup. After the demonstrations ended, at least 70 students were reported to have been disappeared by the states. In response to riots in 2019 due to rising gas prices, the IRGC killed an estimated 300 people in attempts to suppress the unrest and arrested approximately 7,000 more. The claim that Kyle makes that Soleimani was apolitical and uninvolved in Iran's domestic oppression of its own people is categorically untrue. Soleimani took an active role in politics and in the suppression of student groups, protesters, and reformists.
Now, I just need everybody to understand that this is a dude who we were just allies with.
The United States had Qasem Soleimani classified as a terrorist as early as 2005. The United States had been in a state of conflict with Iran since at least 1979. The Quds Force, the combat wing of the IRGC, was labeled a terrorist organization in 2007. Soleimani had been personally under sanction by both the EU and the UN. The IRGC provides material support to Hezbollah, a terrorist group, and Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad. While we might have shared a common enemy in ISIS, it is an obscene stretch to claim that we were ever allies, especially given that the United States would have killed him sooner but for ongoing negotiations to end Iran's nuclear weapons program.
While we were trying to take on ISIS, by the way, after we armed them and funded them, various jihadist groups.
We have never armed or funded ISIS. What Kyle is referring to here is Timber Sycamore, a CIA operation to provide weapons and funds to the Free Syrian Army and other rebel groups to assist in their revolution against Bashar al-Assad. Some of those arms ended up on the Syrian black market, ended up in the hands of jihadists as a result of defections, or were taken by jihadist groups such as ISIS or Jabhat al-Nusra as a result of war booty. We provided arms and funds to rebel groups warring against Bashar al-Assad, not ISIS. Using stolen or smuggled weapons as an example of the U.S. arming ISIS is to stretch the truth to a breaking point. Some weapons provided to the Polish underground found their ways into the hands of Nazis. Did the Allies arm Hitler? Of course not, and this is dishonest framing.
So the Trump administration says, well, we had to do it. I had to do it because he was about to attack us. Is there any truth to that? The answer is no. And anybody who's telling you otherwise is absolutely full of it. There's zero evidence to support that assertion.
Soleimani was in the process of meeting with the leaders of a terror group called Kataib Hezbollah to change their combat strategies to focus more attacks on the U.S. To put it simply, saying it is untrue that Soleimani was going to attack us seems to betray his long history of doing just that. And since Kyle isn't exactly privy to the classified intelligence we have on him, I think we can make reasonable extrapolations on what is known. Qasem Soleimani was coordinating with Kataib Hezbollah to launch attacks against the United States.
And as a general rule, there are no, Shia terror attacks against the U.S. They come from the Salafists, the Sunni Wahhabist fundamentalists.
Literally Hezbollah, Kyle.
So Trita Parsi, who's an expert on Iran, he says the following. Wow, wow, wow. According to the Iraqi Prime Minister, Soleimani was not planning an attack. He was in Iraq. This is where he was killed, at the Iraqi airport. He was in Iraq carrying a message to Saudi Arabia on how to reduce Iran-Saudi tensions as part of an Iraqi mediation effort. And then he's responding to a tweet that says, this is stunning. Iraq Prime Minister tells Parliament U.S. troops should leave, says Donald Trump called him to ask him to mediate with Iran, and then ordered drone strike on Soleimani, says Soleimani carrying response to Saudi initiative to diffuse tension when he was hit. So, not only is it nonsense that they were planning an attack, he was literally on a peace mission when he was murdered, when he was assassinated.
Kyle seems to be insinuating that his source is the NPR correspondent from the tweet, but he's pretty nakedly relying on the gray zone since that's what he linked in his video description. What the gray zone is relying on is a statement from the Iraqi Prime Minister, which reads, "Let history record. I was supposed to meet General Soleimani at 8 a.m., the day he was killed, because he was holding a letter for me from the Iranian side as a response to a Saudi letter, which we delivered to the Iranians to achieve agreements and important breakthroughs in the situation in Iraq and the region." Now, what was this message? I don't know. This is the end of the chain. How people extrapolate Soleimani delivering a message in response to a message from Saudi Arabia as some sort of peace mission is a bit of a mystery to me. Nothing in the Prime Minister's statement suggests that the message was part of any kind of ongoing peace mission. And since there's no other details to this, I think we could safely dismiss Max Blumenthal's reporting on this as Max Blumenthal being Max Blumenthal.
Knowing that we overthrew their government, the CIA did, in 1953, because they elected a guy by the name of Mohammed, who was going to nationalize Iranian oil and give the profits to the Iranian people. We said, no, you're not allowed to do that. We overthrew a democratically elected government, put the Shah into place, who was a dictator, and the Shah kept giving the US and the UK cheap oil.
The Shah was already in place and had been for years, and the CIA did not overthrow Mossadegh. The Shah at the time was Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who had been ruling since 1941, after the abdication of the throne by his father, Reza Pahlavi Shah. The Shah had appointed and dismissed other prime ministers in similar fashion to Mossadegh all throughout his rule. Iran wasn't a democracy in the sense Kyle was implying it was. The Iranian Majlis, which is the parliamentary system they have, was more aristocratic than democratic, and ultimately, while they could nominate prime ministers, the Shah had final appointment and dismissal powers. As for Mossadegh, the U.S. plan to overthrow him was called Operation Ajax, and involved having the Shah issue a royal decree removing Mossadegh from power. It didn't work. The Shah fled to Italy, and Mossadegh had the Nasiri royalist who intended to remove him arrested. That's the extent of the U.S. plot against him. His downfall came days later when the clergy, in a mishmash of Bazaarist, royalist, and middle-class Iranians, protested against Mossadegh for fear of the state falling into the hands of the Communist Two-Day Party, which largely backed Mossadegh. Mohammed Zahedi and a tank battalion forced Mossadegh's resignation, and Zahedi became the new prime minister. The Shah then returned to Iran. Attributing these events to the CIA overplays the extent of their involvement and robs the Iranian clergy of agency, especially considering the CIA's plot failed but the clergy's plot was successful. A lot of its veracity rests on Kermit Roosevelt taking credit for the coup, but he's something of an unreliable narrator. His claim that the CIA overthrew a democratically elected leader in Iran is a claim that gets repeated a lot, and it warrants its own video. And one will come down the road with more details than this. For now, this is the short version in response to Kyle's claim. The U.S. didn't overthrow Mossadegh. The clergy did. The U.S. didn't replace him with the Shah. The ruling Shah had been in power since 1941, and prior to that, his father had been Shah. Kyle's just wrong.
By the way, there's another talking point going around where they say, oh, Soleimani is responsible for killing Americans. No evidence for that either, at all. At all. They just say that. They just throw that out there. And I guess what they're trying to argue is, well, during the height of the Iraq War, in the Bush years, we were also fighting Shia, not just the Sunnis, and so maybe some of them were trained by Soleimani, so yeah, he's responsible for American deaths. Again, they present no evidence, and the one story that they try to use has been debunked.
Kata'ib Hezbollah is a terrorist proxy for Iran, which received direction from Soleimani to step up attacks on the U.S. Even disregarding this, though, the Pentagon figure for American deaths attributable to Iran is 603. Most of these deaths occurred during the occupation phase of Iraq when sectarian violence was highest. The reason we know these deaths can be attributed to Iran is that the instrument of death used to kill Americans by Shia militants in Iraq were manufactured in Iran, specifically weapons called EFPs, or explosively formed penetrators. Not all bombs are made equally, and some leave distinct fingerprints. EFPs likewise have fingerprints, specifically in their sophisticated milling that would have been unavailable to the network of terrorists improvising their devices. The metallurgy was advanced, and the copper plating was trademark Iran. The technology was too sophisticated, in other words, to come from anyone but Iran. There is ample evidence of both Soleimani and Iran's role in the deaths of Americans.
But in Iraq, the parliament just voted the U.S. out. They said, no more, no status of forces agreement. You're not going to stay here. You're not going to linger around. Get out, get out, get out. Because again, also on top of the Iranian general being murdered, also, a popular Iraqi military leader was murdered as well. So they're, of course, flipping out, and they're like, get out. We don't want you in our country anymore. So what was Trump's response? Now, mind you, again, this is the guy who campaigned on getting out of Iraq. What did he say? He goes, okay, no, now we're staying indefinitely. So because I said let's get out, then Iraq goes, okay, we want you out also. We just voted it. It was a unanimous vote. It was like 170-0 or something like that. And Trump goes, wrong. Now I'm staying there indefinitely. And, oh, if you want us to go, you have to pay us for the military base we have there.
The resolution was non-binding. It was also boycotted by Kurdish and Sunni parliamentarians. So Kyle's claim that it was a unanimous vote of 170-0 is silly. The Iraqi parliament has 329 seats, not 170. Nearly half of the Iraqi parliament objected with a boycott. Whether or not Soleimani should have been killed is a debate worth having, but that debate must be informed by the facts. You do not need to lift Soleimani up to bring Trump down.